of corn in the front end of a cow. The different species convert their feed into edible muscle at different rates or different efficiencies. And farm fish hangs out around chicken, in case you wondered. And that simple math, growing all that corn or soybeans, either to eat as people or to feed to the things we eat, really makes up the entire difference in the environmental impact of the foods we eat. But what are we eating? Well, there is a transformation going on in the protein we eat in the country. First, not surprisingly, now that we're all afraid of carbs and fats, we eat more protein. Protein intake from traditional protein sources has consistently risen in the US. Yes, there was a little downturn during the last recession, but it's pretty much steadily gone up over 3 generations. Red meat consumption during that same time has fallen. Most of that drop has been in beef. Pork remains pretty steady. US consumer spending at grocery stores versus eating and drinking places where you trust a culinary professional and a business to give you a dish or a meal to eat there or take away has also undergone a transformation. And with good reason. I mean, picking food in a grocery store can be really confusing, especially if you care about what you eat. I just want to ask, how many of you read the nutrition labels on the items you buy in the grocery store? How many of you, like say when you go to buy a can of soup, read the nutrition labels on every single brand of soup in the grocery aisle before choosing one every time you go shopping? Aha. It starts to get a little complicated if you have to consider all your choices every time. And you all are pretty dedicated, but that probably explains why we spend more and more money hiring culinary professionals and businesses to choose the ingredients and then give us a meal to eat. That as well as my daughter, who wants sushi, and I go like, oh my God, I forgot to defrost the sushi grade tuna in the freezer. I can make that for you, but it'll be tomorrow. You know, convenience, value, culinary skill, complexity, all are driving us to trust complex decisions to culinary professionals and businesses. They are winning belly share. More and more meals we're trusting others to choose for us, others who are not a member of our household who are paying to make decisions. And last year, they won half of wallet share. We spent, for the first time ever in the US, more than half our food dollars to buy meals rather than ingredients to assemble as meals ourselves. And this doesn't include things like a frozen pizza. That's an ingredient. Or a rotisserie chicken. That's an ingredient. We're talking about a complete meal. Since 1980, interestingly, having food service companies and culinary professionals choose food for us is strongly correlated with us eating less red meat and less beef overall. And what are they choosing instead? Chicken. Chicken and red meat are switching roles as the preferred protein in the US diet. And fish and shellfish, which we all know we need to double our intake, is holding pretty steady. If those trends continue, no matter what baseline you pick, a decade ago, 15 years ago, 1980, when the millennials started to come on board, no matter what baseline you pick, probably within the next 10 years, red meat consumption will drop by 20% per capita in the US. A big chunk of the plate, that meat and potatoes plate we all know so well, is up for grabs. And while chicken is winning the race, there's a lot of disruptive menu innovation that could make those choices even better for our health and the health of the planet. We could look at culinary approaches that shift portions of meat and other ingredients. Instead of a steak on the left with 4.5 Brussels sprouts and 1/4 of a carrot, we could slice a little bit of that steak more thinly and make a steak salad. We could look at meat as a condiment, leveraging small amounts for flavor, and take a few minces of that steak and add it to some rice and vegetables, and still have a dish that's profoundly about beef. Or look at approaches from other proteins, from cultures and flavors around the world, tucking that in with other plant-based proteins and still have a dish that is principally about meat. So what does this all look like? Well, in the food service industry, for my next trick, I'm going to make the sausage disappear. If our current intake looks like a burrito you may have bought 15 years ago, 3 for about $2, what would that conservative recommended daily allowance, what Arnold needs to eat, look like? Well, we could take that burrito, and without anyone really noticing much at all, we could replace a portion of the ground beef with seasoned rice. If we wanted to get to the recommended daily allowance, about half our current protein intake, we could start to add fresh vegetables into the mix. And for 100% plant-based, we could add some guacamole and replace the beef with beans. All of these are available. All of these are attractive. This is the transformation that's going on in restaurants now. We could do the same thing with pizza, and maybe you've already tried this trick. If our current intake, well above what we need, is the meat lover's pizza, how could we get to the conservative RDA? I could give a slice to a friend, not Christopher. Or, here's a trick you've often seen in restaurants, I could serve you a smaller pizza for more money. How many of you have seen the $12 9-inch pizza? Yes. I could make it simply a pepperoni pizza. Or I could make it more about plants. I could do something bizarre and wild, like take a pizza and put chicken, shredded vegetables, and peanuts on it. Wow, who would do that? Or oddly enough yet, add squash to it, which is what Wolfgang Puck and Bertucci's, 2 multi-billion-dollar brands, are both doing now. In fact, the Thai chicken pizza really helped build Wolfgang Puck's brand as a fast food brand. And then, of course, there's the burger transformation. If this represents our current intake, the conservative RDA, again, only 3 patties, and look, there is a little bit of pickle poking out the top. If we wanted to get down to that recommended daily allowance, we could take another patty away. But suppose we wanted to make it more about plants that have a much lower environmental impact because you don't need to feed corn to plants to create edible food. Well, you could take one of those patties and replace it with something like a breaded fried mushroom, or make it all about the condiments, which is what 2 of the fastest growing brands, Shake Shack and Elevation Burger, Shake Shack, one of the top performing restaurant companies in the NASDAQ stock exchange, have done, and they're besting the companies that give us the 4-patty and 3-patty and 2-patty burgers on financial terms. What's next in the restaurant industry? Bowling. Because what we're seeing is the next generation of restaurant brands, especially faster service, affordable, casual restaurants, are focusing on bowls, mostly grains and plants, and then choosing a small amount of animal protein. Customization for each diner who gets to choose the mix of ingredients they want, but the protein is never the dominant piece. Roti Mediterranean Grill in the Midwest and East Coast, high quality ingredients, you walk down the line, you fill your bowl. Cava Mezza Grill, California and expanding to California from the East Coast, same thing with more of a Mediterranean flair. Tender Greens, West Coast, moving east, they've taken their bowls, they've put them on square plates, they've put them on wood plates, they've put them on white plates, and they'll take that same approach and they'll either give it to you on a bowl between a sandwich or with a scoop of root vegetables next to it. These are all the fastest growing restaurant brands, and they're all moving in a profoundly plant-forward way. If we reinforce that we should eat high-quality protein, that if we should eat plant-based protein, that we should eat just enough protein, not as much as you can get. Again, none of you said you knew anyone with protein insufficiency. I'm not going to show the slide that also shows that the average protein intake for a Chinese adult is also well above the recommended daily allowance in the US, but it is. We can have a profound transformation on the food industry, which is increasingly choosing the portion and proportion of ingredients and how they're grown in more and more meals that we eat. Why is this important to do? Because if we get protein right, if we get to something like the recommended daily allowance in the US, rather than as much protein as we can get, even if it's still predominantly animal products, even if it's still mostly red meat. Just getting to the recommended daily allowance means that we would achieve nearly a quarter of the US carbon reduction goals, or take the equivalent of taking 88 million cars off the road, while also reducing our health care costs and making food more interesting. We would save 2/3 of all the water used in California. That's more than all the water used for farming in California. And eliminating growing all that corn and soybeans to feed to animals, as we reduce the total amount of protein but keep it mostly, say, beef and chicken, we would free up enough farmland to produce all the fruits and veggies we need to eat our recommended daily allowance of fruit and veggies, and invite another 300 million people over to dine with us. Getting protein right is a big deal. Culinarians and healthcare professionals equal lasting change, and if we get it right, it could be delicious. And thank you. And thank you for the additional training.
Okay, Randy, we might need you. We actually finished in advance because we were so succinct and clear in our message. So you can remind them of that address, which I don't know, the Two Shoe app, NHC 2016. He'll tell you. Was I close? Anyway, we would like to invite questions. We just have some fantastic disciplines up here. We're hoping, we hear in a lot of these conferences that you like to go home and know what to bring home. What could you bring home from this? What could you bring to your hospital, to your work site, to your school, to your community that would benefit from these three fonts of wisdom here who all bring their own perspectives to this? Please start tapping.
Do you want to?
No, I want you to do it.
Okay, I'll do it.
I'm sure I'll screw it up.
No. Okay. So the address again is www.twoshoeapp.com/NHC 2016. And people have already started. Looks like there's a lot of self-help kind of things. How can I cook better? First question. Do you have any recommendations for cooking with spices and herbs? They're wonderful, but it's really hard to know where to start. So someone who wants to start with foods and herbs.
With spices and herbs.
Yeah, cooking with spices and herbs. What was the end of the question?
So basically, how do we do it at home? Where do you start if you're an inexperienced spicer?
It's a good question. I'm a big fan of less is more, but I would find something that you like and experiment with it. So my house right now, it's all about sumac. Sumac adds an acidity level to things. So some simply cooked broccoli with a little bit of sumac, what does that do? Where can I lace it into a couple other things that I might be looking at home, and then go to another spice that you might like. Don't try to get into it all at once. I think it, like the slide says, it gets very, very confusing. But if you just kind of build a base out of something that you like, move forward from there. The other thing is spice blends these days are absolutely amazing, and they've got less and less additives added to them. So I know Lake Sanctuary in the Bay Area is doing some amazing things, and most of your markets these days, if it's a nice upscale market, you can find a really nice flavorful spice.
Are there some that are more forgiving that you can't screw up very much that you want to help them with? Is it the basil and the oregano, or is garam masala in there? Should they get some blended spices?
Yeah, I think when we look at the basics and the traditionals, to me, I don't think you can mess up thyme very much. If you're going to use dried herbs versus fresh, I always go with the fresh myself. But thyme, if you've eaten my food, it's laced in there just almost anywhere. And I think it's not really falls into the spice category, but I think something that people lose sight of a lot of time is just a little fresh lemon zest or a little fresh orange zest will really go a long way to building flavor.
Yeah, I think a lot of the issue is people don't know which spices go together and which ones don't. Are there any rules, any generalities, or just experiment?
Well, I wish I brought the slide, but you can do some basic internet searches, and there are some, when we looked at that big crazy spice blend, and if you take something apart like a mole or a very complex curry sometimes, there's a lot of different layers in there, but do a search about a cuisine that you like and really pick out the three root things that go together, and you'll find out a lot of similarities. I mean, we can cover a lot of ground with olive oil, basil, and red pepper. You'll find a lot of similarities as you move across the world. Ed Lee, a great chef that I like a lot, talks about latitudes, the latitude principle. So if you just follow latitudes around the globe and look at what they're cooking in those latitudes regionally, when you get back to the United States, that all kind of falls in. So.
Great. Great. Okay, and we have a new number one question. One of our attendees is constantly searching for go-to websites, articles, handouts for patients that give quick, concise advice. And they mentioned the CSPI, Center for Science and the Public Interest. And they would like to know what your favorite websites, magazine, what's your source for information, your favorite?
Yumly. I use Yumly sometimes. So they've got how many people went there and thumbs up and how many ingredients, and you can sort by time and various distinctions like that. Others? Yumly, Y-U-M-M-L-Y.
So a lot of the respondents in Kansas City like Thug Kitchen, which is an irreverent sort of vegan site. I think because in the Midwest you have to be irreverent to say no to meat, and so it feels good. I like the New York Times cooking app, and I think Sam Sifton is now starting to send out daily recipes. And one thing that I realize is people who have a community of friends who also cook, and they have parties, and they talk about recipes, and they talk about things that they made with each other, that always helps. And so the New York Times daily recipe is sort of like that online.
I'm weird. I don't have internet at my house. But putting myself in someone else's shoes, I would probably go to Plate magazine. It's a chef-oriented magazine, but they have a lot of recipes for making a sauce or a stock or something that you'll do in a slightly larger quantity that will keep for a long time and you can use over and over again if you're going to take the time to cook something complex. I also read menus and then go cook based on what's fresh.
I think that's good advice. The two that I use a lot these days and I absolutely love there's an organization, Zapongo, which has an amazing app, an amazing healthy eating platform, but has tons of really, really cool recipes and very, very simple and very easy to use. And another one, getting back to the spice conversation, which might help people navigate a little bit, is foodpairing.com, which will essentially start to open up grids of flavors that have like compounds and all kind of go together. So you could start with something like basil, and that'll give you 3, 4, 5 more choices that'll actually go to basil. And you can actually store these things as a recipe, or look to another recipe that you want to actually mimic and create, and it will store your amounts. So you're actually creating flavor profiles that'll work, that you can jive and kind of adjust as you like them or don't like them. But it makes it a little bit easier to try to take the guesswork out of, especially in my field, trying to be over creative sometimes. And I see a lot of young chefs just try to slam as much stuff as they can in there. And like we said, they don't always make sense, or sometimes they fight each other.
Repeat the website.
It's foodpairing.com. Oh, the first one, Zapongo.
Oh, yeah.
With a Z. I-P.
Z-I-P-O-N-G-A.
Good.
Zapongo.
Thank you. Okay, Arlin, can you update us, without using the internet, on the status of McDonald's restaurant locations now versus a few years ago, changes in revenue versus locations, like the ones you mentioned, Tender Greens, Veggie Grill? Can you talk to us about McDonald's at all?
I can make some general comments based on what I remember reading in the Wall Street Journal. You know, McDonald's is in trouble. You know, that's the takeaway. They've rotated through the C-suite. They've made some really weird moves, like with the new CEO announcing, thankfully, that they were going to switch to antibiotic chicken. And I think it was antibiotic-free chicken. Sorry. And then, which, you know, with their buying power would really help shift the poultry industry. And then 12 days later announced they were moving, I think it was 6 of their 7 most popular chicken items from the menu. And then, you know, heading in the other direction. They're throwing spaghetti at the wall. This is the first time I can remember them announcing a closure of several hundred restaurants and then switching more to a franchisee model where they own less of the restaurants they operate. You know, I look at it as a really big ship that's sinking slowly. I've worked in very big companies. It's really hard to innovate internally because everyone is so loyal to what got you to the point you're at. They're going to feed tens of millions of meals, whether it's for a few thousand or a few thousand plus or minus a few hundred restaurants for many years to come. But it's going to be other companies that come up with bigger changes.
Good, thank you. And I think we have something there with the antibiotic chicken, augmented drumsticks. We can really, okay. This question is for June. Do you believe that employee health and wellness programs are beneficial overall? Anyone can answer, actually, but.
That's a big question. Yes, very much so. In fact, we put healthy workside food as a trend for some of our trends findings for this year. Yeah, work lunch is actually the most dissatisfactory eating occasion out of all the 8 eating occasions that we measure. It's not just that you don't have access to cooking or kitchens, it's that other people culturally don't respect the lunch hour. So even if you respect eating lunch and you pull down your shades and you close the door, inevitably someone will schedule lunch during lunch hour, or they'll come in and ask you questions. So it's somewhat of a cultural problem. I think when I was at Google observing Googlers, a lot of the Nooglers, they were really uncomfortable eating lunch together because they're just not used to it. They're eating sad dusk lunch. And one of the greatest benefits I see is not only do they get to eat fresh prepared foods, they get to eat it together socially. And that interaction to me is the most beautiful.
Thank you.
Anything there? Well, we could add, I think I've been hanging out with the Google guys. They're pretty cool. And they are doing some food transformation work currently. And to hear it at first, let's make it really practical. They want the Googlers to be more productive, but it's a win-win. So if they make great tasting food that's good for them, part of that productivity is being creative, being alert, not feeling sluggish. And a lot of that is the same direction that we've been talking about the food industry moving here. So one of the worksite issues is return on investment for lower healthcare costs, right? But a more immediate one is productivity. So what we're going to try to do is generate more data about immediate return on investment in terms of productivity, not just lower healthcare bills. So there's a lot of room for data collection there for an evidence-based building on these new kinds of projects we're working on, I believe.
Thank you. Here's a question for anyone. Is there a concern that companies are simply learning how to rebrand foods without changing nutritional content? We're all wary of big corporate entities, and this is becoming more prevalent. How do you feel about that, and what can the consumer do about that?
This will be short. That's kind of my job. So I study consumers, gather their challenges, needs, aspirations, and then that gets turned into healthy marketing, packaging, and communications.
I think it's a bad practice that takes advantage about people's confusion about the complexity of nutrition. Bottled water labeled gluten-free, or gluten-free and kosher, as we were joking last night, It's just a silly thing, but so is it, the notion that if you just sprinkle a little isolated pea protein in anything, including a bottle of water, you can raise the price and sell more of it because people think that they simply need more protein. Because we're not speaking about that. It's like the third rail. If you talk about all 3 macronutrients, people don't know what to eat. So you need to talk about what you should be eating in the right proportions. I'll go on my little soapbox for a minute to say, I think that the convenience of being able to do good without actually doing anything is a real dangerous strategy that big companies take, and is at the root of our obsession with solving the food waste problem, which for a variety of reasons I think is grossly overstated in the US, especially on the restaurant side, but allows you to do good without actually changing your products in any way.
But if I could build on that, June, you told me that in your research, what you're seeing is the public is quite wary now of the food industry just changing the front of the box. So we've got the new nutrient to demonize, be it sugar. Okay, great, we screwed them over with fat and they ate more sugar, so now we'll just switch to sugar. Okay, but what's coming next, it's just gonna have artificial sugar in the same box. So that's the solution, right? No. So what June has been telling me is that consumers are getting weary of this, and I really want fresh and simple, because it's harder to screw up fresh and simple than to manipulate those demonized ingredients that they're responding to here.
Yeah, good point. Okay, another question for Chef Bill, but anyone can answer. We've all heard a lot about charred foods. You've spoken about it, and we all know some of the negatives. However, you have a slightly different take. How do you feel about charred foods, and what's its place in the diet?
How do I feel about what foods? I can't.
Charred.
Charred foods. Not charred the vegetable. I love them both. I think it's great when it's used correctly. I think it's a valuable tool and a valuable technique. I think this plays into sometimes on menus with the words we just talked about. I saw something labeled Brooklyn the other day. I don't know what that is, but it wasn't where it came from. It was in there with vegan, vegetarian, gluten-free, and all the others. So charred and burnt, when it's just thrown on there to be a trendy thing, I don't support it at all. But when it's used to build flavor and when it actually comes from some tradition, I mean, if we look at calçots from Spain, if we look at the way that things can be prepared and there actually is a burning element or some char that needs to be involved and that imparts a pleasurable experience, I'm all for it.
Just add one observation. Sure. So they're starting to add chef to packaging too, and it doesn't even have a chef's name. It just says chef. So,
It's not even chef inspired.
not even, no, just chef.
What does it?
Chef jerky, I don't know.
What does it all mean? I mean, that's what I mean. I saw
Because I think the companies have figured out chefs are really powerful.
people, people are really, really busy. And more to the point of the last question, I mean, it's what June's doing and the work that everybody up here is doing is we need to be able to ask the right questions. A lot of people don't know. Even the chefs sometimes don't know. They just know, oh, look, sustainable, gluten-free, whatever it might be. Water's never really had gluten. Shouldn't be.
We could add gluten to it, but it's
Maybe-
probably better business to add protein.
Maybe in Brooklyn. Oh, there you go.
There's a lot of extra gluten around these days, though.
Arlin, don't talk to yourself. You've got to talk to the audience.
I was going to say you could add gluten to it, but adding protein is better. However, there's a lot of gluten available these days, excess gluten, so you could probably do something with that.
We also saw our first sighting of FODMAP on a bone broth, frozen bone broth label.
What was on it?
FOD friendly.
FODMAP.
FOD friendly.
Okay.
We've been
Good.
looking.
Okay.
Let's have one more question, and this is another practical one for anyone. Suggestions on the best almond milk or coconut milk options for someone who doesn't want to make their own. And maybe Christopher knows this. Often they're full of sugar, so go ahead, you're on.
No, I'll pass. All those end up being vanilla and chocolate and sugar, and if you can find any of those that are plain, I mean, that's not really the default. You don't usually get plain soy milk, plain almond milk, plain coconut milk. No, I don't really have a good answer, sorry. You're gonna have to throw us another one. We can't end on that unless somebody has a great answer.
I would say it is always disappointing to try and replicate something with something that it's not. Better to spend the money on a slightly better bottle of wine.
Good. And we will end with that. I want to thank our panelists. So we've got about 20 minutes of downtime, so relax getting to lunch. Lunch is at 12:45. I want to remind you there's special interest tables. It's all the same food, but you get to eat with different people. Nurses, dietitians, lifestyle and behavioral change, integrated medicine, elective